Let's move on to common interview mistakes. We'll look at 10 mistakes which fall into 4 categories. Behavioral mistakes. You'll learn about the mistake and what it means for this job. The candidate has bad etiquette. That means maybe they don't hold the door, or they try to impress certain people and neglect others in lower positions in the interview, or they aren't polite to people in the office, like the receptionist. Maybe they don't listen or they talk too much. Perhaps they look at their phone, or worse, noises come from their phone. What does this mean for an employer? They may believe the candidate is impolite. They might feel offended. Maybe they think the candidate seems entitled, or they don't value their time. Mistake number 2, the candidate has poor body language. That means the candidate has a weak or overly firm handshake. Maybe they don't feel a connection with the other person. They don't give eye contact or smile. And what does this mean for an employer? Maybe they believe the candidate lacks confidence, or they have too much of it. They might think the candidate isn't friendly or warm, or they can't trust this person. They might also believe they seem too comfortable. In future videos, we'll talk about specific body postures that will help you feel more confident and project confidence to your potential employer. We'll also discuss common differences in men and women's body language. Mistake number 3, the candidate's appearance is inappropriate. Depending on where the applicant is interviewing, some of the items in this list may be faux pas. The applicant is underdressed. For example, they're wearing jeans, a revealing blouse, or sneakers. They have bad hygiene, such as dirty hair, an odor, or their nails aren't trimmed. Perhaps they have a strong perfume or cologne. And finally, maybe their tattoos and piercings are on display. And how would this come across to an employer? They might think they wouldn't fit in. They might believe they couldn't put them in front of a client looking or smelling like that. They might think they're not seriously interested in the job. Or they might fear they have a hard time getting the person to follow their dress code. In future videos, we'll go into detail about how women and men can dress for success in job interviews. So we've seen behavioral mistakes related to etiquette, body language, and appearance. Now let's talk about preparation mistakes. Mistake number 4, the candidate doesn't know enough about the company or role. That means the applicant can't answer questions about the company, such as its history, vision, or structure. Perhaps the applicant answers questions in a way that shows they don't understand all of what's expected in the role. Perhaps the applicant asks questions that make it clear they lack knowledge about the role or company, which they could have found through research on the internet. And what does this mean for an employer? It might seem like the applicant is unprepared, or that the person lacks initiative. They may believe the applicant has just learned about the company because they're looking for a job, not because they've had a long-held interest in working for the company. If the applicant doesn't know all that the position entails, it might seem like they wouldn't thrive in the role. Mistake number 5, the candidate isn't able to answer questions adequately. That means that the applicant doesn't provide adequate answers to questions on topics like past experience, technical knowledge, employment gaps, future plans, or the applicant freezes up when asked a question they don't know. How would this come across to an employer? They may believe the person is just really nervous and it's unclear if they have the skills and knowledge needed. Or they could think that the person didn't take the interview seriously, they didn't prepare enough. They could also think that the person doesn't know the answers to the questions, they don't have the knowledge needed for the role. Finally, they may believe the person lied about some of their experiences listed on their resume. So preparation mistakes could mean everything from being unable to answer the employer's questions to an inadequate understanding of the company or role. Finally, let's look at communication exchange mistakes. Mistake number 6, the candidate reveals too much about themselves. That means that the candidate acts like the interviewer is their friend, saying things like, "You know how it is." Or they share unnecessary personal details during the interview. Maybe they engage with small talk with the receptionist on topics that are unprofessional, controversial, or distasteful, like dating patterns, money problems, or political preferences. This sort of mistake is more common once an applicant is confident they'll get the job. And what does this mean for an employer? They may determine the applicant is overly confident about getting the job. They may believe the applicant is disrespectful. They might not like the applicant after some of their comments. Or finally, they might believe the applicant lacks professionalism. Mistake number 7, the delivery is weak. That means the candidate's responses are too long or too brief. It may seem like the candidate is reciting from a script, which is more common for those new to interviewing or non-native English speakers. Maybe the responses aren't focused or delivered in a structured way. Maybe the candidate doesn't fully answer the questions or answers in the wrong way because they didn't understand the question. A weak delivery would lead an employer to believe the candidate is nervous or confused by the questions. They may be unclear if the applicant has the background needed. They might believe that verbal communication isn't a strong point for the applicant, perhaps even including their English skills. Mistake number 8, the candidate makes demeaning remarks about another person. This could be towards current or past employers, clients, or colleagues. For example, they don't respect the confidentiality of clients and share names and too many details. Or when asked to talk about a workplace conflict and how the applicant resolved it, the applicant describes a person using negative adjectives like immature or overly sensitive. What does this mean for an employer? They won't trust the candidate. They may believe that candidate won't take responsibility for wrongdoing. They might feel worried they would walk on eggshells with this candidate and wouldn't want to get on their bad side. Mistake number 9. The candidate shows too much enthusiasm. That means they don't express clear needs from an employer. Like, I'm willing to work overtime from time to time, but I have firm family commitments most evenings. Or in countries where employees can negotiate the amount of time off, vacation, or sick days, the candidate could be prepared to express what they want, such as, I want 20 vacation days annually. Another example is if they're overly agreeable and don't push back, even when the expectation would seem unreasonable to most people. Or the candidate asks for feedback and affirmation during the interview, or they try to get the employer to commit to the next steps. They say things like, I really need this job. And how would this come across to an employer? It may seem the person is desperate for a job. They might believe the candidate doesn't have other options. They might think the person doesn't have a backbone. Or they might think the person wouldn't stand up for themselves to coworkers, a boss, or a client if boundaries were crossed. They might also think they could give this person work and they wouldn't complain. Mistake number 10, the candidate lacks conviction. That means they don't clearly state their ambitions and how the job fits into their plan. Maybe their tone is flat. Maybe they don't ask questions that show genuine interest. Or they talk a lot about themselves and what they did in the past, but they're not forward-focused. A candidate's lack of conviction would lead an employer to believe it's just a job for the candidate. They aren't excited to work for the company, or they lack passion for the role, or in general. Maybe they don't have a clear career plan. Finally, they wouldn't be a highly motivated employee. So now we know communication exchange mistakes are when a candidate reveals too much about themselves, makes demeaning remarks about other people, shows too much enthusiasm, or gives responses that lack conviction and passion. In this video, you learned about common job interview mistakes and what they mean to a potential employer. You learned about etiquette, body language, and appearance mistakes. You learned about mistakes relating to inadequate preparation and knowledge. You also learned about many mistakes that happen during the communication exchange. You have seen how you can shape the way you present yourself and your experience for better or for worse. In these next videos, you'll learn what you can do to prepare for an interview, how to present yourself in an interview, and how to perform well in an interview. After watching them, you will also be able to correct these mistakes so that you'll make a great first impression as well as a lasting impression and land the job you want.